So let's talk about tariffs. I think Stephen did a fantastic job. So I'll just focus really niche. I'll just focus right on shipping here. So tariffs, people really understand this, right? It's a tax on imports. It's going to drive up the cost of retail goods. It's really going to hit the goods coming from China. That's the highest volume, highest tariff rate. What's this going to do? Well, first of all, and I think this part is pretty intuitive. I think folks understand this. It's going to lead to some demand destruction. A consumer is going to have less purchasing power, or there's going to be a push to say, hey, we're not going to take the Chinese goods, but we're going to go somewhere else. And so China-US is the top trade route. That might decrease. I mean, I think that's pretty easy to understand. However, a little counterintuitively is the alternative sourcing part of this equation. So if primarily the replacements away from China are other Asian nations like Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, India, those sorts of countries, you could actually see this counterintuitive outcome where your total ton miles, you think about the ship, it has cargo on it, and it has to go from port to port to port. That's how you measure demand. It's not the total dollar value, right? It's not the total amount of goods. It's all the goods and how far they have to go. And so if you have this new patchwork of like inefficient rerouting where all of a sudden, instead of just doing China, US, China, US, China, US, you're doing this weird patchwork of like regional pickups and drop-offs and then going over to the United States and changing up the ports, you could actually have a higher demand for the ships, even with the same or less cargoes. So a little counterintuitive, but that could happen here. What about Mexico? I get this a lot. They used to say before this administration, people said friend shoring. Well, right now, I don't know if tariffs, I don't know if we're creating a lot of friends, but you could say near shoring. What about Mexico? And on paper or like in our heads, it sounds nice. We'll just build a super highway from, the middle of the country, like from Chicago down to like Mexico City, right? Or we'll build more railroads, right? And the interesting thing here is that maritime ships are about 10 times more efficient than trains, and they're about 50x or more efficient than trucks. And if you involve like mountains and terrain and a lot of stopping and idling and offloading and transloading and warehouses, it can be up to 100 times more efficient to use a ship than to use a truck. So suddenly you think, well, 15,000 miles across the ocean, maybe that's actually better than, 1,500 miles down the road. You wouldn't think so, but the way the physics work out and all that sort of stuff, I know we're not really focused on climate change or carbon reduction at this time as much as we were years ago. But even if you want to just talk about economics and fuel consumption, trucks are not the answer, and ships are significantly more efficient even than trains. And let me just give you, one example to illustrate this. So a modern large-size container ship can carry over 20,000 TEUs. That's a 20-foot equivalent box. And 20,000, one ship. You say, okay, well, you can maybe put, 2 of those on a truck? Maybe 4 if it's like one of those double trailers. You got 2 boxes and like a double trailer. It's like one of those risky ones. You don't want to take those over the mountains, right? But you got one ship or you got 10,000 trucks, right? Or 5,000 of like the long double trucks. And one ship, 5,000 of these monster double trucks. Each one has a driver, driving it, like filling up with diesel. Like you can understand why just moving from like Asia to Mexico is not, it just doesn't work. It's like, it sounds cool at the bar with your friends, but then you actually put the pencil to the paper and it's not economical. So interestingly, the net impact from tariffs, it's going to be negative. It has to be. I mean, if you look at the demand destruction level, that's going to be net negative, but it's not going to be 100% net negative. In fact, the alternative sourcing here could offset a very large degree. Net negative still, yes. Would I rather not see tariffs from a shipping perspective? Obviously. But I think about, I don't know, somewhere between half and maybe up to 90% of the US-China offset gets alternative sourcing will offset a lot of that. So it's very interesting. I think maybe a point a generalist market hasn't thought about yet. To illustrate this a little bit, this is in 2025. These are container ship cargo miles by destination. And this is just port destinations. This is not exports and offloads. So for instance, like China is 14.2% of the destinations. But you got to imagine this is empty container ships going to China and getting filled up with cargo, right? They're all pretty much like empty and loading up. The US is 8.8% year to date as of March 18th. And so these are mostly full container ships offloading cargoes into the United States. And so you think the tariffs are going to hurt US-China trade? Absolutely, right? That's the entire point of the tariff, is to hurt China-US trade, right? But if you look at this, 8.8% is the actual export offload in the US. and you say, okay, is it going to bring it down 10%? Is it going to bring it down 20%? You're talking about 1 or 2% total. You see what I'm saying? You take 10% off this or 20% off this, you're talking about less than 1 or 2%. Meanwhile, if you're offsetting it with Malaysia or India or some of the other nations that I'd mentioned, you're not going to see that big of a net impact, especially if the ships are less efficient. An interesting chart that we're keeping a close eye on at Value Investor's Edge is the year-to-date comparison, looking at the impacts from 23, 24, 25. Interestingly, U.S. imports have not dropped off at all, noticeably. I mean, maybe like 1 or 2%. If you look at China, their import loads are going up. And so this is probably, we're hypothesizing this is front running, trying to get those imports out of China and into these countries, especially the United States, before the tariffs come into effect. So we're going to keep watching this. We're updating it every couple of weeks, and we're going to see, we're expecting this to start coming down, and we're going to be interesting to see what happens with the US over time. A very interesting chart, in my opinion, especially to watch China and to watch USA.
Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Any views or opinions expressed in the webinar do not reflect those of Seeking Alpha as a whole. Seeking Alpha does not take account of your objectives or your financial situation and does not offer any personalized investment advice. Seeking Alpha is not a licensed securities dealer, broker, U.S. investment advisor, or investment bank. Information provided by the investing group does not constitute investing advice. Investing group leaders are third-party authors that include both professional investors and individual investors who may not be licensed or certified by any institute or regulatory body. Any content and tools on the platform are offered for information purposes only.